getting started, I just wanted to, jump script completely. And part of that is that I think, I'm learning something coming out of the elections. It's okay to jump script, and it's okay to talk off the hip, and sometimes that can work. And I brought a prop that's going to help me with that. and I wanted to talk a little bit about Yankeedom and how we restore Yankeedom, this place we live that's people are aware of. We're settled by Europeans on top of a culture that existed here prior to that, and about a particular fish that's going to help me tell that story. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask a couple of questions. And it relates back to how we work and how we deliver these messages from science and translate them into language that can be used to achieve our common goals, I'd say, to recover a productive ecosystem, protect the world in which we live, and to think about how we work in the world of diversity, not biodiversity of the ecosystem, but the diversity of the individuals, the humans that we have to work with. And I'm coming to you from a place that's at the northernmost extent of New England, right on the northernmost edge of the coast here in Maine. And I'm looking out at you all and I'm saying, wow, this is a diverse audience. And I'll bet they're extremely, we're tolerant, right? We're very tolerant of each other, and it's a diverse community. And where I live is in the easternmost county in the United States. It's Washington County. It's the oldest county in terms of age of the people who live there. It's the whitest county. It's one of the poorest counties. And there's a lot of cool things happening there. And the reason that I'm wearing my cap and my camo is to talk about some of the folks who live there who are bringing forth sort of some actions on the ground that are helping to recover their little corner. So I'm going way down hyper-local now into this tiny little, very isolated place where the paper mills have been closed down, the fisheries are largely depleted in many ways, and the list goes on, and we're living currently in what we call a lobster bubble. So the economy is the biggest fishery economy that we have remaining in Maine is the lobster economy, highly dependent upon bait. This fish here that you see is one of the most sought after bait fish there for the biggest fishery in the economy. And I call it the perpetual motion machine. And as we've heard some of the discussions over the last 2 days, it occurred to me that we're talking about analogs, and we're talking about biomimicry. And one of the things that hasn't been talked about very much, it's been touched on in various ways, but it is the sort of lose none of the pieces of what you have left. So this is the cheapest thing to do is to protect what you've got instead of having to go in and restore it. So if you can protect what you have, and another feature of the place that I come from is that it's one of the most intact aquatic ecosystems or aquascapes, I say, in New England remaining. So wild rivers, many of them undammed, and extreme biodiversity. And for instance, Cobscook Bay estuary is, I think, in terms of marine invertebrates, one of the most intact and diverse. And how do we assure that we lose no ground? And that's part of what we're doing in Eastern Maine. So if you looked at your program, you see, this is the Salmon Federation. They're talking about alewives. Why is that? Well, the salmon's kind of this umbrella species, I say, and many of you know what that is. If you can protect salmon and its habitat, you're probably protecting a lot of organisms underneath it. And with the alewife, that's a sort of termed a keystone species. So again, if you can protect a keystone species, you're protecting a lot of things that are sort of bridged against it that it's helping to hold together. So and they're at different levels in the food web. So here's my backyard. These a friend of mine who's been managing this fishery for many, many years, Daryl Young, and you'll see Daryl here in a minute. When I worked with Daryl for the first time, he said, "Dwayne, you know I'm the most illiterate person you're ever going to meet." And as I got talking with him more and more, I realized Daryl knows a tremendous amount about this place, and he's invested a tremendous amount of his life in helping to manage and restore this place. So when I needed to know, well, where are all the smelt spawning, the last stronghold of smelt in the United States, Daryl knew right where they were. And we were able to go in and document these places one by one, stream at a time. Some of these streams are a foot wide. So Daryl's been managing this alewife fishery, and we heard that the river herring, which are blueback herring and alewives, are in jeopardy. They've declined tremendously, part from overfishing at sea, these massive boats that are just off the coast, part from overfishing locally, and part from habitat issues and other issues that we'll talk about. So the fish that feeds all. So again, hyperlocal knowledge. If you go far enough back, you can learn some lessons that we can use today. So this is the word for alewife or river herring from the Passamaquoddies, which we're in the Passamaquoddy homeland where I'm located. If you look here, you see lots and lots of fish. So if you think about the passenger pigeon and the blackening of the sky and the fact that they were in such mass, that's something that's been lost. That's a piece that's been lost. We're never going to get it back. That's extinction. However, with this species, you might see the same thing, the blackening of our rivers yet again, to the point that you can, quote, walk across them, right? The fish that feeds all, so who does it feed? And who did it evolve with or co-evolve with? So this is our so-called diadromous suite. Diadromous means that they go one way or the other in and out of fresh water and seawater to spawn. The only one that goes to the sea to spawn is the eel, American eel, and the others are coming up into spawn, and they're moving a lot of nutrients. So we all are very familiar with the documentaries from the Pacific Northwest where the salmon come in and they die and the carcasses are laying there. Well, what we found is with the stocking programs of salmon out west, you can stock and stock and stock and stock, but if you don't put nutrients in there, you're not going to keep the ecosystem running, and you could stock forever and it won't work. If you take a dead carcass of a fish and you put it up there, well, so now we're taking hockey pucks, pasteurized hockey pucks of salmon racks from the Pacific Northwest, putting them in the river, stocking the fish there, and poof, it actually works. So here in our ecosystem is very, very different, and these fish don't necessarily die after they spawn. The sea lamprey, however, is one that's been villainized, and we think of it as a nasty old thing that sort of like bacteria. They're all bad, but sea lamprey are incredibly important to the ecosystem because, one thing, they do die after they spawn, so they're bringing tremendous amounts of nutrients into our system. So this is the sort of Yankee, this is the New England ecosystem that we're living in here. So, I'm going to reveal, come out in front of you all. I'm an old swamp Yankee. My family they've been here living close to the land for generations, and many of the people that I'm surrounded by have been doing that for many, many generations. And there's some things to learn, and there's some investments being made by people that are, down in that part of the other Maine. So there's the two Maines. There's the beer capital, Portland, and then there's the Millinocket and Calais and other places. So there are people making investments, and they're sticking to their place, and they're trying to do things that they believe are good and right. So for instance, here's a trivial question for you. If you think about how we work in community, we have to think about what do we know about the community. So how many guns are there in the state of Maine? Take a guess. Anybody know how many people there are in the state of Maine? There's a little over 1 million people. No, keep going. No, more. No, a little less. 9 million. Yep. And actually, I've done my part. I actually own somewhere around 9 or 10 guns. And, and I do that because I can go right out my back door, and I'm hyper-local, so I've eaten a lot of these critters, and a lot of the ones that are running around. These, like beaver, we've heard a lot about beaver. Biomass, think of the beaver biomass that we could have again. Well, beaver is very, very tasty. And I have had it jerky and many other forms, and that's something that you can do without shipping it in from who knows where. River herring are the same thing. Let's think logically about this. Let's be lazy, okay? Let's let it come to us. So the blueback lost its K there, but we got a few issues. But here are the river herring, the sea herring. Technically, Menhaden, if you look at in 53 from which this was taken, I think they were classified still in with herring. They're different genus, but the shad, the blueback, the alewife, the Atlantic herring, they're all very, very close cousins, and they've all partitioned themselves into separate habitats over evolutionary time, and they're very different. So some will spawn in dead waters and moving waters, and some are bigger than others. These are not to scale. And the blueback and the alewife are often put into the same lump because it's very hard to tell them apart. So people talk about alewives generally, but in fact it includes both species. And anyone in the room ever had a bloater? Anyone ever eaten a bloater? All right, there's one. How about a kipper? Okay. Beaver? No. Moose? Okay. So let's think about these fish. These fish will swim literally into our backyards. We can go out and we can grab them. We can put them in a smokehouse. This is the omega-3 fatty acids. People were talking about diets. What fish can we eat? What can't we eat? What's good? Do we have to look at Monterey Bay's site and so on to determine? Well, these guys are low on the food web. They don't accumulate a lot of toxins. They're right in our backyards. And if you do it right, they're very, very tasty. So there was a period of time when they were being canned. This is JONESPORT, just down the road from where we are, Washington County. But what's the rum doing here? So this was part of the whole rum triangle with fish being shipped to the Caribbean, the rum being brought back. Well, it turns out that people in the Caribbean still have an appetite for alewives. And they're getting them not from Maine, but they're getting them from New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, where the law is still allowing them to ship them out. We're trying to revive this tradition and to do it right, thinking about the microbes that we have to be concerned about. So all the smokehouses were closed down at one time. So a little bit more about, place and people and the impact that they can have. The most inspiring talk certainly were the children today. And I wanted to say something about Bucket here. So I work with two different janitors. Bucket Davis on the left is running his own educational program. He's in East Machias, and he's the janitor. Well, they've given him the bus, they've given him the kids, and he brings them down and works with us to teach them about their local river, where he says no one in East Machias should ever grow up not knowing what an alewife is. And this kid comes from a clam digging family. Clammers dig it. You see his shirt. Well, he's learning about this practice of putting away food, local food. And this is our prototype. We have now owned this. It's a licensed kitchen with a smokehouse on the front, so we can go community to community and talk to people about why we need to restore these rivers and why the fish are so important in this web of life that we're surrounded by. Well, you see alewife way over there, small pelagics. This doesn't show the freshwater side of things. So we've heard a lot about oceans. We've heard a lot about land. We haven't talked about the freshwater side of things that much in this conference. And these diagamous fish are the bridge between that. Of course, the water moves and various nutrients, but the fish are moving in various directions. So they're super important. They're super vulnerable as a result because they're in these various habitats and across huge geographies. The salmon, of course, go all the way to Greenland before they come back to their natal rivers. Alewives are moving out into the ocean where they're vulnerable to other things, closer to home. But they are a keystone. And, of course, we've all seen the food web before. jump by that. So here's a local bridge. A friend of mine, Jeff Day, who works with the Sea Run Brook Trout Coalition, he's doing great work. And one place that everyone should go to see if you're in Massachusetts is a place called Red Brook down on the Cape in Falmouth. And they're restoring Sea Run Brook Trout there. They've taken old cranberry bogs and they put the stream back in there. And these trout are coming back in numbers, just really incredible, just spawning just 2 days ago. They've got video footage. So this is part of old Route 1 apparently in the town of Rowley. And this is called Mill Stream. So the mills, of course, played an important role in, let's see if I can, we'll go back, in the development of this place. So the first power was, of course, water power and animal power, draft power. And what I wanted to say here is that we left a lot behind. So that mill is no longer operating. It probably hasn't operated since the 1600s. And if you go back in time and you look at the Magna Carta apparently had a clause in there that if you're going to build a dam, it has to have a place in it wide enough for a sow to pass through. Not only pass, but to turn around. So that's because the salmon were so big that they needed a place to pass. Well, here we are in 2016, 17, and what we're finding is that, you know, we're depleting our nearby oceans, and this is just showing a bit of data verifying that, in fact, these diadromous fish are showing up in the guts of our local ground fish. And the percentages are low here, but historically the percentages were probably much higher in their diet. And in fact, Ted Ames in Maine has shown that cod, the nearshore cod populations won't reproduce successfully unless they have that high omega-3 fatty acids. So they'll eat shellfish for a long period, but when they come into fecundity, those eggs need that fatty acid, and without the alewives pumped out of the rivers, they just don't get what they need. So this is showing the biomass depletion, 1850. You can see on the bottom the average density, tons per. So I don't know that technically this is sequestration. It's not. This is periodic. So these fish are here, but they're here in mass. And a friend of mine wrote a paper, Ann Hayden with the Manomet Center, that, and I believe, I'm not sure just where she got the data from, but that, in fact, the biomass that was lost in cod was greater than the biomass that was lost in bison. So massive amounts of potential here, and this is, someone had mentioned the eroded baseline. Our expectations of what is possible have been eroded. No one alive has ever seen the potential of some of these places. The rivers are a clear example of that where I live. Again, the declining cod. The fishways that were being built just 15 years ago were built too small. Now we're worried about suffocating the alewives as they're waiting to get into the elevators or the fishways. So our expectations need to be framed appropriately as we're designing what we're designing to, we're not really, this isn't an analog, this is just, again, not throwing away the parts and giving them a chance. So, of course, your fish need to come in and out of these rivers and pollution and so on, but dams is important, and in the age of renewable energy and so on, we think about dams and hydro as renewable. Well, it can be, but it may not always be. So we have some dams that are chewing up fish. They're not low impact hydro. They're not certified low impact hydro because there's no fish passage back and forth. And you can look at the Columbia River and other places and get an idea of what's involved in generating hydroelectricity out of our rivers in trying to be compatible with migratory fish. So here's another name for river herring, the Gaspereau and the St. Croix. So this is the border river between the U.S. and New Brunswick on the border of Canada. And there's this big story here. It's made national and international news. And all of what you see in this most recent period here, so this was the biggest river herring run left in the United States, over 2.5 million, until the legislature passed a bill to put in a board in the fishway, a simple board in the fishway, and it crashed it. And this was a dispute among anglers and a lack of real science interpretation, I would say. And we looked at it from our organization, being locally, as a big failure of ours. We didn't step in soon enough. We eventually did in partnership with the Passamaquoddies, and now this is going back up. So this is the Schoodic River, is the Passamaquoddy name for this river. And back to Massachusetts, the arch that I showed you, these mills go back 1600s, and they're still on the landscape, and we need to be paying attention to these. And this is just the latest chapter in a very, very long story of our efforts. I call it the first environmental battle on this continent was fought, obviously, around this. King George ultimately made the decision around these things. Who could build a dam and where, and with what restrictions or not. And of course the tribes were part of this, and they were petitioning as well. So this is a fantastic quote that talks about sort of, it's a bit of the haves and have-nots. So there's the industrialists who are starting to build this infrastructure. And I like this, and I don't know how to describe my feelings around this, but it's sort of like when water runs uphill, that's when we'll let the fish go, okay? We've got to get our minds beyond where we are now if we're going to recover these systems. And so where's this coming from? Is it a Puritan thought process around what's right and what's wrong? So this is a town that I work in a dam that was built in the 1820s. Now we're trying to get kids hooked on fishing, right? Well, back then, oh my God, don't let them down by the river around old Catfish John, right? So, Massachusetts dams. So this is where I say everybody needs to start a club. So the girls that were here earlier and other folks, right in our backyards, we have the potential to just blossom these fisheries. And it's been shown over and over. You go to the Sebasticook, when the Edwards Dam was taken out of the Kennebec, and then the Fort Halifax Dam taken out, now we have 3.5 million fish where there haven't been any in 170 years. And they're choking the fishways. So we can have recovery, and we can have it here just like we've been seeing in other places. And we can bring those fish back, and I say, let's bring the fish back and then fight over what we do about them. And Maine is not quite as many dams, but there's a lot of them. And this is one that we just bought. Our organization bought this dam. This dam is in the headwaters of the Cobscook Bay. It was called the Cobscook River, but they changed it to the Orange River after, funny story, John Crane, whose house was where the colonists dressed up as Indians before they took the ship at the Boston Tea Party. Well, he got a land grant in Whiting, Maine. He came up, and this is the Crane Dam. The timeout is coming. So this is a fishway built in the 1860s, and it was the success story of Maine. People were coming from all over the place to verify that, yes, fishways can actually work. Well, it burned, the dam deteriorated, and here we are today without a fishway in that dam. So we raised $100,000. We bought the dam, and it came with a house. And as just a quick series here. There's your fishway on the right. The fish would have to have legs. Evolutionary miracle. So eventually, this is what we did, and this has been. And I won't bother with this, but we have a couple of videos. So we're engaging citizens in the monitoring of the fish. In order to harvest them, we have to know how many there are there under law, and just for common sense, we're looking at the sustainability. So we're using modern technology to work with people like Daryl and Bucket and others to monitor these fish so that we ultimately know that we can do this sustainably forever. Just like many people have done for thousands of years. That's it. Thanks.